thanks everybody for joining today. Looking forward to a great conversation around the green fee. Thanks to Carmela and Kalana for joining us and spending a little bit of time with us to talk about the green fee. So go to the next slide. Yeah. So quickly for the agenda, we'll do a little welcome, connection before content, share, remind ourselves what CCL is, what we're trying to do. Then we have a nice presentation and Q&A by these two about the Green Fee Advisory Council's green fee. And then we'll do a little bit of update around CCL National, which will focus on the big conference at the end of July and lobbying, and a little bit about state and 2026 events. Okay, so to start us off in CCL fashion, we'll do a little connection before content. So originally the question was, what's your favorite fish? But since the World Cup is taking place, and some people may not like fish, I don't know, but who can't like soccer or football? So we'll also feel free to raise your hand, shout it out, put it in the chat, answers to one or both of the questions. So I don't know, Noel, if you want to stop sharing or yeah.
So I'll go. How about Humu Humu Nuku Nuku Apple Ah? I like to see him when I go snorkeling by the fish.
Salmon, okay.
I'd say Uhu for the same reason. I like to see him when I'm snorkeling.
Okay. Very nice. Ono, okay. Ula.
And my favorite soccer team right now has got to be the white ones. The white ones, or the All Whites, I think they're called, which is a takeoff from the famous rugby team from New Zealand, which is the All Blacks. Soccer, it's the All Whites. And they held, top-ranked Iran to a 2-2 draw. So they punched way above their weight there. Exciting stuff.
So why were they in black then for their game?
You know, I can't answer that. Just contrarian. I don't know. Maybe the other team was in white and they chose first. I don't
know. Nice way to hedge yourself, Karina. You're in good standing there, with especially after Messi's performance the other day.
I will take the win wherever it is. I was happy for Messi. But yeah. I'm having a blast watching all the Global South teams just show themselves and have a blast. So it's great.
Yeah.
Well, Humu Humu has some nice blue and yellow on it, so that would be my fish, but it's also the colors of Argentina. My wife is from Argentina, so viva. We're hoping to watch a lot more games.
Yeah, well, yesterday's any indication, should be. Okay, well, thanks everybody. Oh, thank you. For the oh yeah, I agree. That was quite impressive with Côte d'Ivoire. Yes. Some yeah. Well, and what was it Cape Verde too? So yeah, Spain I think has fallen a little bit in the rankings after that. So. Okay, happy to get back to the regular scheduled program. Okay. So Ruth, do you want to tell us who we are?
Oh, I would. Thank you very much, Paul. So these are our core values. You can see them written there on the slide. And today we're emphasizing our core value of optimism, which is sometimes hard to dredge up, but in the face of challenges, we choose optimism that people are good, that democracy can work, that we can solve climate change, and that we are greater than our flaws. Optimism turns our concern about climate change into action, and it's catching on. More and more people join us every day. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Definitely a message we need to hear often, as you're pointing out. So, thank you.
So,
Keith.
Citizens Climate Lobby empowers everyday people to bridge divides and build political will for effective climate solutions in Congress, and also here in the state of Hawaii.
Okay. And Ron?
Yeah, so the policy commitments that we have for effective policy legislation boil down to 3 broad items: reduce emissions, primarily that's carbon dioxide emissions and other greenhouse gases, removing climate pollution, which is either artificial technology or forestry or other natural ways to draw down carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and to protect people as best we can from financial harm caused by regressive policies. Right now, the action that we would, if we could wave a magic wand, would be carbon fee and dividend legislation, but that's not going to happen with this congressional makeup. So we're looking for other opportunities, such as forestry bills and right now funding for the Forest Service.
So yeah, now I want to turn over to our guest speakers, but before, just I think hopefully you can see, Carmel and Kaulana, how some of Citizens Climate Lobby's priorities do intersect with those of the green fee, and especially the action that Ron mentioned that we're taking at the national level. So first, just want to introduce both of our speakers. And first thing I want to say that I just learned is that they're volunteering all their time here, and they volunteered their time to meet with us ahead of this a number of times and set this up and what have you. And they're volunteering all sorts of their times, talking to many other groups. We're not the only ones that are getting these presentations. So again, big mahalo to both of you. So Carmela has served on the Green Fee Advisory Council, and as I said, has been offering fantastic presentations to various communities throughout the state. She works also with Hawaii Green Growth, which actually referred both of you to us. So thanks to them. And Kaulana is, I guess fair to say, he and his team are very responsible for all the communications around the Green Fee Advisory Council, what have you. So again, both of them very active and really looking out for what's in our best interests as a state and the environment of our state. So again, big mahalo, and I'll turn it over to you, Carmel.
Thank you, everyone, for having us here. Kaulana, I feel like you are the wizard, is that the right word, behind the presentation deck? So I will lead you to do that. But in the meantime, I kind of will thank you for the introduction, Paul, and really appreciate you folks having us here. As Paul mentioned, I am part of the Green Fee Advisory Council in the voluntary other duties as assigned part of my full-time job with the Hawaiian Council. There's so many councils. And for those of you who don't know, Hawaiian Council, our mission is to uplift the Lahui, so Native Hawaiians, but also local communities, economically, politically, and socially. And my role there is specific to our work regarding regenerative tourism. Tourism has often had a lot of detrimental impacts on not only our environment, but then also on different parts of our economy. Even though it boosted, a lot of our communities are getting priced out. But that being said, initiatives like the Green Fee hope to course correct improve, and have, and as I say, my one-liner is we work to make tourism better for community, and Green Fee definitely does that. And so, Kalana, can you start the presentation when you get a moment? Perfect. And so I'm going to give an overview, and I know some of you folks, I recognize faces and names from other presentations, so some of this might be redundant, but just so that we all will have kind of like a solid and equal like understanding of like what's happened since Act 96 was signed into law a little over a year ago, and to the present moment. I'll just go over some of that, but and then really talk through like what the outcomes were from this past legislative session, and more or less where we go from here. So our next slide outlines some of the purpose of the Green Fee Advisory Council. So we were established by Governor Josh Green back in August, and we are, like Paul was saying, a group of 10 unpaid volunteer members, and we built on the work of the Hawaii Climate Advisory Team, or formerly known as the CAT. So that was kind of like the 1.0, and we're the 2.0. And during one of our first meetings, before we really got into the meat of what we were doing, we took the time to really think about what are our principles, what are our values, and similar to how you folks started your meeting, like grounding us in that intention of why we're doing what we're doing, because the work is magnanimous, it's hard, it's oftentimes political, but we established our shared principles, which were fairness, equity, balance, community, and collaboration. And that's something that all of us, regardless of what sector we represented, could agree that those were vital to this work ahead. And so the next slide lists out some of our outputs. And so when we were convened by the governor back in August, September, we were tasked with two things. So one was to develop a process and criteria for evaluating project proposals and potential green fee funding. And so we established that back in November of 2025. And then the next part of that was to create a prioritized list of funding recommendations to hand over to the governor. And then the governor then included that in his supplemental budget for the 2026 legislative session. So that happened earlier this year in February, which seemed like a second ago, but it was really 4 months ago at this point. So the next slide outlines the process for year one. And so kind of like there's a Olelo Not Yeah that says like we need to look back to look forward. So kind of looking at what's happened in a little over the past year, we all celebrated around this time last year when SB 1396, which later became Act 96, passed into law. So many, likely a lot of you folks here in this room had been advocating for something like this for nearly a decade, and it finally became law. And so as part of that, one of the things that Governor Green did was establish the Green Fee Advisory Council back in August. And one of the things we did was, in addition to kind of like creating the rubric and the criteria by which to evaluate projects, we opened up a portal, because there was one thing that we knew was that community, and many of us are of and from community, are the ones who understand what the needs are on the ground. And so we opened up a public portal. Kaulana and the team at Pa'akai Communications were really integral in helping kind of create that technological infrastructure for us to get hundreds of recommendations from the community. And so we took that from, between October and December, lost lots of sleep, and then evaluated all of these projects that were submitted through this portal, through the criteria that we established, and came up with the recommendations to submit to the governor. And of note, the recommendations we made were very minimally modified by the governor before they were provided to the legislature. And so then in January of this year, the governor included all of these green fee funding recommendations into what was called at the time HB 1800, which is effectively the budget bill, the supplemental budget bill. And so throughout the legislative session, there were hearings on the budget. There were different, discussions we had with many, different subsets of lawmakers of how to best understand what the green fee is, how it's being implemented, what these funding recommendations are, what it took to get there. And about a month ago, the final list was released and passed through both chambers. of the legislature with roughly 60% of the recommendations intact. And the things we're celebrating, and I know the 60% number is a thing that's been discussed in many communities and many circles, but similar to what I forget who mentioned, so forgive me, but we're leaning in the positive, right? There's so much that could have happened with the green fee, but we're kind of celebrating that more than half of the recommendations were retained across the $129 million of projects we recommended. We're also celebrating that exactly $500,000 was allocated towards making sure that there is tracking and transparency so that all of us as a collective can ensure that this money will go towards its intended purpose. And throughout the session and continually, there's increased legislative understanding of like what's important to community and what initiatives are like of paramount importance from all the voices that were heard in this process. And so just to do, and this is all available through this QR code, but to run through some of kind of like the top tier priorities, the ones that were really the I would call wins, right? Like there was so much. One of the things I think that we've mentioned in one of our webinars was that there was so much need demonstrated, and so I think some studies have estimated that there's a $500 million gap in terms of initiatives that in terms of things that we need to kind of combat climate change. When we kind of did the math of all the 600 plus proposals that came in, that was roughly $2 billion in need, and so we had at the time 129-ish million to work with, and so abundance of need, but this is where everything landed. So $3 million towards climate resilience crews, 1.5 million towards urban extreme heat reduction projects, and 400,000 towards a state climate adaptation plan. And then next we have some of our more like environmental stewardship projects. And so 6.4 million going towards community-based ahupua'a restoration. And then another 5.75 going towards nearshore marine environments. And then another 1.5 million going towards like restoring wetlands. And I'm not going to say the rest because I don't know how to say. I'm not going to say those, and I'm going to mispronounce them. So, wetlands and other riparian zones. I'm going to go with that. I am not a climate expert. I am a community expert, and so that is something that I don't know how to pronounce. The next slide has a couple more of the priorities. Oh, sorry. We had a lot of priorities, and so now where we are and where we stand now, and to kind of zoom out for a moment, because I know but as someone who works as a government or who has a contract in my full-time job capacity working with a state agency, some of these things are less intuitive, and so governor and the legislature approved the budget, and so now all of that funding gets allocated towards an agency. And so, as part of the recommendations, as part of the governor's recommendations, he kind of like designated like what agency these would go towards. So, if you notice in some of the recommendations, in the parentheses, there would be an acronym. And so, DLNR, so the Department of Land and Natural Resources, DBET, Business Development, DBET, Economic Development and Tourism. Sorry. And so, all the agencies will then get the funding and then disperse it according to the priorities. And so some folks have already additional budget lines in place. Some of them will go to RFP. And so that's where we are in this process, and that the purpose, all of the agencies will be releasing RFPs to then allocate the money to community. And so our best advice to folks, and we'll get into the weeds, is to kind of like stay on top of like HANDS and HIEPRO. I've never actually said that acronym out loud, but to kind of like really be mindful of like or understand when the RFPs go out. And so the purpose of an RFP or an IFP is like based on like the type of project approved by the legislature. So the perfect example, right, is the 6.6 million allocated towards ahupua'a restoration. And so this is a community-based initiative. DLNR will likely do, and no, likely they will do an RFP for this initiative, and so that will all be available on the state procurement websites. And the one thing of note, and I think some folks, there was maybe a little bit of confusion, and for good reason, right? Because this is the first time we're doing this process. When the council solicited for ideas from the public, there might have been an assumption that, oh, if we recommend funding, then that an organization is going to get it. For clarity, because and I think Eric Ho, who also is on the council, that was such a limited window, and we don't know everything. And so the only way to really have this be an equitable and transparent process was for this to go through a state agency's RFP process, which is 100% transparent. The evaluation rubrics are included in the RFPs. They're all posted on public websites. And there's like a level of transparency and scrutiny that we just didn't have with the time we were given. And also the council, because we're in an advisory role, we don't have procurement authority. So we legally could not allocate funding, but we could recommend it, which is now where the state agencies come into play. That was a lot of words, but the next slide will kind of have a little bit more of the timeline. And so last month, the project types were determined by the legislature and finalized in the budget. And then summer to fall, the state agencies awarding funding will release the RFPs. And so again, we are doing our best to kind of stay up to date, but agencies are really in it right now, creating all RFPs for all the different projects. The RFPs will likely be due fall to winter, and then winter to spring, applicants will be notified and contracting will begin. And then we do this all again next year, right? So the legislature will appropriate funding in late spring 2027, and then there's going to be a go forward process for green fee funding for the next year, because we are operating on a fiscal year. And then so before June 30th, 2027, the contracts must be issued to meet fiscal deadlines. So all the money needs to be encumbered by the end of next fiscal year, which is June 30th, 2027, which is a year from now, but I fully believe it'll just happen in a blink of an eye. So if any of you folks are Ma'a or familiar with procurement process, this is a very traditional and normal state procurement process. But for folks that are maybe not as familiar with it, there's a lot of resources available to support as people are kind of navigating this process. And so one of the things that we, again, as a collective are hoping to do is get everyone kind of ready. So when these RFPs are out, folks are just ready to apply and are able to. And so one thing to make sure is to check your eligibility. And so so organizations need to register with Hawaii Compliance Express and have a current HCE certification to receive funding. Noting that funding is usually based on reimbursement rather than advanced funds. There will be liability insurance required for on-the-ground work. And another thing of note, which I know happens in a lot of INA-based programming, landowner approvals and compliance may also be required. So whether that's, if you're operating on private land, having an MOU, if you're working in partnership with publicly owned land, making sure that kind of those, that information is known. Because that will be something that may be required as part of the RFP. And again, it depends on the agency issuing the RFP. But those are things to kind of get ready for as this process moves forward. So what can you do now? And there's a lot of hats I think we all wear in this room, right? Either as someone who might be seeking funding yourself for an organization you are a part of, or maybe a community member, you volunteer with an organization and would love for them to get funding. There is several things that could happen right now, because I think I feel the energy. We're all just eager for this to get going already. And so there's a QR code to join an interest form for training. But then also support community organizations through the RFP process and participate in capacity building workshops. So if, for example, you are a volunteer with an organization and maybe they have a capacity to submit RFPs, maybe they don't, but maybe helping steward them or shepherding them towards resources that can help them as part of the RFP process. Because, again, in my W-2 paid capacity, we do a lot of RFPs, and they can be, especially depending on the agency, quite quite, 23-page RFP and a multi-phase application process. It can be daunting. However, there are a lot of resources and technical assistance available to folks. And so also align projects to funded categories and agency outreach. So the project list is in one of the QR codes on the slide. And so looking at that list, so again, like the one that comes to mind is that Ahopo'a restoration, right? Or the nearshore marine support. And so if there's one of those projects that looks like it's aligned, and then okay, well, DLNR is the agency who's going to be partnering with organizations, and making sure that you're up to date on the DLNR website, on hands, and making sure to like stay in touch with that. But then also if there's like a partnership you have with maybe one of the site directors for a space you steward with DLNR, there's so many different resources available and people who are like able maybe to like provide like additional support at that level. And then also like preparing application documentation. Again, like I can't predict what some of these RFPs are going to have outlined, but a lot of the core messaging is similar, right? Like what is your organizational capacity, mission, values, potential impact? And so like, making sure that core messaging is aligned, and then also like registering and making sure all the documents are updated, CVCs, certificates of insurance, like some of the less glamorous things that are kind of like the legal framework by which a lot of these things operate should be prepared. And then like having community conversations. A lot of RFPs often require, or it's a bonus to have letters of support. So if you are at an organization where you have a great relationship with the landowner, or there are multiple organizations that collaborate on a project, really having those conversations now to get that process started. And that's it. Sometimes these are longer and I don't know where it ends, but thank you, Kalana. But I know I just talked a lot and I have a feeling there's lots of questions. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Or if you're, cooking dinner tonight and think, oh, I have a question I didn't think of, all the folks here have our contact information. And so we would be happy to help answer the questions. So again, mahalo for having us and for all the work that you folks do. I know on the policy side, things are hard. It's always hard, but it's you folks in the room that really kind of carry the work forward in the long haul. And I've been there. I've been at the Capitol. I live at the Capitol sometimes, and I know it's a lot. So I appreciate all that you do for not just green fuel related things, but climate related issues at large. So mahalo.
Mahalo nui loa for you folks for the great presentation. And I have to say, certainly, I think I understand the process infinitely better than I did before. So excellent. As you mentioned, we're kind of, well, I guess within interesting, I don't know what CCL could do as an organization, whether we qualify, but appreciate kind of the invitation to help other groups, since I can see us being very involved with that part. Anyways, fire away, folks. Otherwise, you're going to have to listen to me ask questions. I think it's better, definitely better coming from you folks.
Yeah, but I have a couple of questions. Thanks very much for the presentation. I think it was very informative. Addressed quite a few of the questions that many of us have about the process. A couple of questions. So you mentioned that there was $500,000 allocated to enable transparency, right? The tracking piece, which I think is really important. I'm just curious as to whether or not that also covers, outcomes. So the tracking of outcomes. These projects are going to promise certain outcomes, and we want to make sure that they're actually meeting those goals, and whether or not the tracking mechanism that you described will cover that. That's one question. The second question is, what are the lessons from this initial run? That I'm pretty sure that there are quite a few that will still be encountered. But if there's some pressing lessons that we need to take note of, or organizations need to take note of as they're moving forward with ideas and potential projects, if you have any of those, that would be great, greatly appreciated.
Yeah, totally. So in terms of, Kalana, do you want to talk about the tracking?
And yeah, I can take on the first part because I've met with the Govs team quite a few times this week. So I have a few updates, but the tracking and transparency measure will be going through the Department of Budget and Finance. So this is a great time to collect input and feedback on how does that tracking and transparency look like. And the project outcomes and the results of those are super critical. So over the next month or two, we'll start to discuss and how does this dashboard framework look like and how do we communicate that across different channels, and how do we collect that data from different departments being involved. So would highly recommend that you kind of keep an eye out for how do we communicate that out. So kind of be on the lookout for in the coming weeks on that front. And then I'll pass it over to Carmela for the second part if you want to take that.
Thank you for that. And I would also add to the tracking piece, I'm going to temporarily take off my advisory council hat. So I also sit on the Care for Now Coalition, which is kind of one of the entities that helped to get this passed last year. And that is, I think, transparency and making sure we're measuring outcome is Noelle, I hear you. It's a desire for all of us to make sure that this happened, that we are able to really articulate what the impact is for all the reasons. I think that those don't have to be stated because I think we all know them. But yeah, that's hugely important. So I appreciate that question. And also all of us deeply care about that as well. And I think lessons learned, there are a lot of them. And I would say a couple off the top of my head. The first one is how we're all learning what this process is. And I think one of the learning curves that we learned throughout the legislative session was, even legislators weren't really sure of what the process was. So a lot of the conversations with them was helping to understand what the process is for this money to get into community. And I think the more legislators were kind of familiar with the process, the better it was in terms of getting the intended outcome. So I think every year everyone's going to kind of become more accustomed to how the funding is allocated, where the community priorities are. And I think it's hugely educational for all of us. I mean, I think the importance of invasive species removal and native plant propagation is even more apparent, right? We had so many project proposals of that. And then, and then things that are related to visitor education and educating folks of how to be a better visitor here in Hawaii. And so I think every year we learn what's important to community, and that was really helpful. And then I think I'm really loving how you folks introduced the meeting, and that really leaning into this optimism moment, right? I think there's a lot of criticism that could be had about the process or about the whatever, but at the end of the day, this is tens of millions of dollars, no, more than that, going out into community that wasn't here last year, right? And so I think we all need to take a collective moment to really relish in that, because that is a strong foundational start. And my prediction is that this is going to just keep getting better year over year once we create better systems, once we create better tracking and accountability measures. And so we're gonna look back on this many, many years from now and think, wow, remember year one, look what happened. And now, with the green fee, all of these really paradigm shifting changes have happened in Hawaii because of this influx of funding. I think that is a big lesson in optimism and just building something really meaningful, which takes a lot of time. It looks like Irene has a question.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for answering and giving us that presentation. This question is kind of like a three-part question, and this kind of relates to a bill that I supported last year, which was SB 2925. A big part of that funding part was that it gave tax credit to homeowners who had edible coconut trees. So I wanted to ask if there was allocated funding for conservation bills to incentivize actions from the community. Second was, what are some criterias that these bills are evaluated? So when we write or propose bills, we can, have a smoother process through the committees. And does it need direct mention of the green fee to fund those tax credit? And how do you, as the advisory, communicate with the finance committees to allocate these resources? And is it specifically given only to state agencies and their partners?
Okay, Irene. I love a three-part question. I'm going to answer it backwards, and I might have to ask you to remind me the other part. So the last one first. So in terms of like our interface with finance committees, limited mostly to the hearings. I think as anyone can predict, um, meetings with the finance chairs are relatively sparse. And so, we did our best to make our testimony for all of the budget hearings very robust and informative. And yes, to your question, and that the funding was allocated directly to state agencies. And then the agencies are then responsible for distributing it beyond that. Um, and then let's see. Second question was evaluating criteria for potential bills. Can you like clarify the question for that one?
Yeah, totally. So this was based on just a question about a previous bill. So a bill would be incentivizing citizens to grow edible coconut trees, and it would have tax credits given to these homeowners. And would you foresee, like in that case of that bill, what are some criterias of bills that can use green fee funding, and how would, like, you talked about a criteria process where you kind of look at the proposals. What are some of those criteria so when we propose those bills, it's just smoother in the process and more robust as a proposal?
Got it. So I think, and Colin, I'll have you fill in any gaps that I say. So one of the things I'll maybe make mention of is the bill itself, so Act 96, in that that is the bill that essentially governs how green fee funding is allocated. And so I think any kind of like companion, or not companion, that's the wrong word, any related bills to the green fee, I think um, may or may not, it depends on what the bill is, right? And so I feel like any bills that are like introduced related to the green fee, um, it might get a little, I wouldn't say complicated. However, I think I think I'm tripping over my answer because I think no one will, there was a lot of, how do I phrase this? Act 96 is great. It's not perfect. And so I think as a result, there have been kind of like different schools of thought of, oh, do we try to propose a different bill? Do we try to amend the bill? And so I think as a council, or even as me personally, we are trying to like establish a solid foundation with that bill as it currently exists. And in terms of additional legislation, I don't think I'm informed enough to be able to say yes or no to like proposing certain pieces of legislation, and then to also clarify the criteria. That is that is the criteria that we use to evaluate like the proposals that were submitted through our portal that we would then include it in our in the budget recommendations to the governor. So it wasn't necessarily a bill criteria, but more of a project criteria. So for example, a project to I don't know, like have a guide at a trailhead to inform visitors to not trample the native plants, like could be a proposal that was made, and then the criteria that we created would evaluate that proposal and then potentially recommend it to the governor for funding. Kalana, what would you add to clarify?
Yeah, and I would probably provide maybe advice on how to approach it for next ledge session because there were ancillary bills that related to the green fee. So, for example, HB 1949 included the tracking and transparency and was very community based focus. Unfortunately, that bill did not pass, but of course, the appropriations in HB 1800 did. And so, my advice would be to approach it two ways. One is to continue advocating for a bill for next ledge session related to that issue, but also in tandem, think about submitting a project through our public input forum once that opens up in the fall of this year for next ledge session, so that you're approaching it in two ways. So, hypothetically, if one doesn't pass through, then you may have another avenue. So think about it in that case of like, having two different two different verticals of approaching it. And another piece of advice, and this is just more holistic and bigger picture, but the way that Act 96 is structured is, even though there are recommendations made on behalf of the council and the governor's office, it still needs to be appropriated through legislators. So in this interim period, it's a great opportunity to work with your respective representatives and legislators to better understand what are their priorities for next session. How can you work together to ensure that maybe there's a project that you want to potentially increase your chances of getting passed through for next session. So just some pieces of advice. I think this is a great opportunity to start kindling and having those conversations with those legislators, as well as other advocates who may be working on behalf of this sort of similar interests for a project or bill related to that. So just some things to keep in mind as you think about the next few months.
Thank you guys so much. That was super helpful.
Thanks, Irene.
Yeah, and this process is like innately intricate, and so like thank you for the questions and appreciate you asking them, because there's a lot that's been going on. John has a question.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Carmela. That was a great, really dense presentation. I appreciate it. You spent a lot of time on it, I'm sure. So you said 40% of the funding was redirected by the legislature to non-environmental efforts, and that's a lot of money. And the Green Fee Advisory Council and Care for Aina now didn't object. Jeff Mikolina said, "Oh, public confidence is going to be undermined," but there was no objection. So I'm worried that next year the legislature is going to take more than 40% and more and more. Should I be worried or not?
That is a very real concern, and I get it. I think all of us were biting our nails, that last week during conference when we were wondering what's going to happen. But I've said this a couple times here, like I'm a perpetual optimist, and so my best hope, right, is that because there's so much community accountability in this process, my best hope is that we again as a collective are able to demonstrate impact so profoundly that it'll be unquestionable when these funding decisions come around next year, that this money not only is having an impact, but more of it's needed to go through to its intended purpose. And so I think a lot of us, have kind of had like the spectrum of emotions of disappointment to celebration to elation to anger. I think no one taking a look at the full list, there are some that will definitely like make a head kind of turn or scratch, but I think at the end of the day, we're resting on the fact that we did get a majority of the funding, and that because of like the immense community advocacy, the hope is that we'll just be able to get more of that next year, because these projects they're gonna knock it out of the park, and people are gonna say, why did we ever second guess it? So that's my hope, but I am an optimist.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carmela.
Yeah, of course.
Noel, did you want to pose your question? I see something in the chat.
Yeah, I may as well. I just wanted to, and maybe it's to be clarified offline, but the question that Irene posed to me, it suggested that there might be a pathway for a program to be introduced through a bill that would call for funding through the revenue, the green fee revenue, right? And it sounds like there's a process that needs to be followed. And as Koalan, you mentioned that second option, which is just run it through the process, run it through as a proposal, and then have it tended to that way. So I guess the question is there a way for a bill to be introduced for funding that would draw on the green fee revenue?
So this isn't intended to sound like snarky or whatever, but I do feel like, and then this is just me bearing witness to legislative sessions over the years, like any bill is possible, right? And I think one of the scary word that I don't think legislators love, candidly, is the word special fund, because I think that in one iteration of the green fee before it was actually passed, there was a thought of a special fund. And I do feel like this session, there was a bill that was going to create a special fund towards certain dedicated purposes. It didn't move past committee, right? And so it's possible to create, a bill that could create a better or maybe an enhanced, more deliberate process. But I think that is kind of like subject to all of the things that are part of this whole systemic process of will that circumvent another bill and the legalities, which I personally can't talk to that part, but I think short answer, it is possible, and there were kind of similar-ish bills that were introduced this past session.
Okay.
Colin, do you want to add to that before we go to Ron?
And I also do want to add that kind of ancillary to your question, but we are also thinking about how does the green fee look like for next year. So things may change in terms of structure so that it's more complementary to the projects that are submitted and recommended on behalf of the legislators. So I think, these are all great pieces of feedback and input that we're getting to really think about how does that structure look like for next year.
Thank you.
Sorry, before going to Ron, Lila, I saw you put your hand up. I didn't know if you had a question. You had your hand up before Ron, or
thank you. I'm sorry. I don't know where that little icon is for the hand.
Sorry, Ron.
I just a comment, and thank you so much for being so articulate. This is not my field either. I'm learning very quickly, and fortunately, I'm blessed with Noelle's guidance and Paul's guidance. What I wanted to encourage all of us and see how you felt about this. It's an election year, at least for the House. I don't know how the Senate terms are, but having been in the House and not having this as my content area, I would like to encourage all of us to be out there right now, even before election, and sharing what we know, which is probably a whole lot more than what the electeds know, and asking them outright, what do we want? And so maybe that's where you could help us also, not today, but at some point afterward. What 3 things would we want to ask them? Because there's going to be community forums, neighborhood board meetings, and the more awareness that we can offer, it's not so much pressure, but it would give the electeds at least a little bit more information and backing. So maybe you could help us with that after the meeting is sent us. What 3 questions would we ask them?
That's a great question. I will
with answers.
Who is the communications maven of this team?
And I think that's a great piece of feedback or input, because I think really the consensus cross session is that we should be working with legislators, not working against them. In fact, working against them may hurt. So I think working with legislators, especially given you mentioned that this is an election season, working with elected officials on supporting the projects that we want to put forth for next session, I think it's really important. So more about supporting than seeing them as adversaries.
And how giving them content to use as justification. Because even the Water Land Committee, or the Hawaiian Affairs, or even the Ag Committee, oh my goodness, they're operating on, they're looking at what a bill says, not necessarily a vision. And you have the vision stated. So you're so articulate. I'm really impressed, and I don't want to be back there, but I wish I was back there with you or with your support.
And I think, yeah, of course. And I think this is a great moment to start thinking about the projects that you would like to see for next session. I think the session itself is so short. And funny enough, I attended a Civil B town hall where they talked about how session is so short that it's hard to make these decisions in such a truncated time frame. But I think right now in this interim, it's great to start kindling those conversations with those stakeholders who will make those executive decisions. So I think if you can start thinking about that, I think it would be great.
And just one last thought on that is you might ask as a session before the session starts, and I don't know who the chairs will be. We'll find out when that happens. Is to ask them to convene an info briefing on a particular topic, and that you would help them with that. They won't convene it if they think they're responsible because they don't know the information. So yeah, so Kalana, if you can get in there not just to support but actually to assist them in the conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I think one of our biggest key learnings is that we need to get more in front of legislators. I think there are so many different communication channels and tactics that we've leveraged to educate and inform individuals about the projects that were put in front of them. But I think it's also really important to get directly in touch with them. So I think that's something that we're also thinking about.
I want to be very respectful of Carmela's time. She needs to go somewhere else. But also, well, first of all, again, big mahalo for you folks taking the time to do this. Great presentation. Really appreciate the Q&A. If you're serious about being open to more questions, I have a few, but I didn't want to raise them here. And my guess is maybe other people do as well. Is it okay if we email the two of you and recognize that you're doing this as volunteers, so won't expect answers, in 15 minutes or something. So, but, whenever you folks have a chance.
Yeah, most definitely. And also, I mean, and I will, how do I say this? A lot of the questions you folks have are questions that a lot of people are having. And so I feel like the more we could help share and make sure everyone is aligned and understands where things currently stand, we're happy to. So keep them coming. And I'm sorry I have to go. There's a graduation tonight, so I'm excited. But I'm really grateful for this. And I mean, I have 4 more minutes if anyone has a quick one, but otherwise I'm happy to answer additional ones.
Well, our quick one comes from Karina, who always tries to make sure that we get a group photo with everybody.
Oh.
So I would say that's the last question or the last request, and then you folks can go.
I love a photo.
Okay, ready? Here we go, everybody. 1, 2, and 3. That's 1. And another one. 1, 2, and 3. Right.
Thanks, Karina. Thanks, Carmela.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kalana.
Thank you.
I'm also happy to stay on. Carmela, feel free to go. I have time. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them, but also happy to convene over email if needed too.
Of course. Again, sorry to hop, but mahalo for having me again. Happy to answer any questions, or maybe I'll see you again at a future meeting. Happy to be here. And again, grateful to the work this group does. These are the thankless, some of the moments are thankless, but it's definitely worth it. So I appreciate all of you. Mahalo.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I also wanted to reiterate that even though Carmela is part of the Fee Advisory Council, I'll still be part of this team as we move into implementation and how do we frame out Green Fee 2.0 as I'm coining it. So I'll still be here. So I'm happy to answer questions about how does implementation look like, how does 2.0 look like, things like that. So all are welcome.
Okay, I'll leave it up to the group. We can go ahead with the slides, or we can take Kalana up on his offer if people have more questions. So Ron, I know you had your hand up and then you put it down.
Yeah, yeah. Just in the interest of time, I think I'd rather do it offline, Kalana, via an email. Thanks for the opportunity, though. Great presentation.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, well then, Kalana, you get to learn more about CCL, I guess. So here we go.
Yeah.
Back to our show, Noel. And I think it's
yeah, updates and actions.
Ron.
Yeah, I think it is too. So we're briefly going to cover events, CCL's monthly meeting, which happened last weekend, 7 a.m. on Saturday, call to action, and some training opportunities. So in the slide here, the next slide, there's some links that folks can put in the chat regarding the monthly meeting call, the national call. And I just give one example of an outstanding interview that was about 30 minutes long. Dana Nuccitelli, CCL, says, is there anything else you think would be helpful for CCL volunteers to keep in mind with our ongoing Fix Our Forest advocacy? And the gentleman said, Tyson Bertone Riggs said, yeah, I mean, I would say don't give up. You know, it's easy to get too pessimistic about Congress's ability to act, and we can be letting them off the hook. He went on to say, we have to believe that they can make positive changes, and it's holding them accountable for those positive changes that usually gets us to a better place. So that's an example of one exchange from an outstanding interview. The monthly call is to support the U.S. Forest Service. This is an action that changes typically on a monthly basis, and appropriation bills are being discussed right now, fiscal year 2027. So the link somebody will kindly put in the chat for how you can take that action would be terrific. And then,
Ron. So yeah, so Kalana, if you want to join CCL, or you don't have to, you can take the action. So
yeah, yes, you can take the action without paying a huge entry fee for CCL membership, which I think is right around $0 right now. So it's a great bargain. The next slide here, educational training opportunities. There's the Bridge program. There's training coming up tomorrow for those who will be in DC for the lobby day on July 28th. That training's coming up tomorrow, and the link is on the slide there. And somebody, please, if you would, put it in the chat.
Right there.
So that's now I'd like to turn it over to Virginia to talk about media actions that we've been taking.
Wait, can I just one quick second? Sorry. So, Kalana, just to make it clear, so we have our own, I'll say, director of media or what have you, both on the national level for CCL and for local Carbon Cashback Hawaii. And that's Virginia, who you'll hear from. And she does a really impressive job. So if there's, I guess sorry, Virginia, I'm going to put this invitation out since it probably means more work for you. But anyways, that if there's certain media that would help to come from volunteer organizations, ideas, topics that you want, we're very happy to consider them. I mean, I can't make any promises, but you can see from the bar chart here, we don't have a huge number of people, but the people we do have been quite successful. John Kawamoto, Noel Orin, two of the mainstays, getting their pieces put in various local publications. So just want to make you aware of that. Go ahead, Virginia.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah. There's a list of them at the bottom of that slide, so you can see all the various authors. And as Paul said, we do like new topics that we can write editorials about or letters to the editor. So send them our way. Do you want to go to the next slide? Okay. So this past month we had 7 publications, which I think is some kind of a record, and they covered a lot of topics. So I just made a little list of them. And so we had 3 published about our concerns about the LNG proposal. We had one published about the solar tax credit. We had 2 about permitting reform locally and nationally. And then we had an op-ed by John about the legislative session and how there was not a lot of progress on climate action. So thanks to everybody who wrote all those. We also do Instagram. Jamin is our resource on that. And there's also CCL as a national organization does Instagram. And then I think this one CCL Hawaii, Karina, also does Instagram. I think she posts the monthly meeting posts.
And again, feel free to follow us and boost our numbers. We're working in that direction. So, anyways.
Yeah.
Thanks, Virginia. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. So Paul, I think this was my task to cover this real briefly. So
yes.
the summer conference is in July. It's in person in Washington, D.C., and it's a high point of our volunteer experiences, I would say, to be actually in D.C. and get to meet with our members of Congress or their legislative or energy aides. So we know right now there are 2 constituents going from Hawaii, and that would be Paul and Karina. And if anybody would like to join them, you travel at your own expense all the way over there. And there is registration and facts link in the chat. There's 2 speakers that are going to be, one is the keynote speaker. They're outstanding individuals. Entrepreneur of the Year for the gentleman Jigar Shah, and a research postdoc PhD in climate fee pricing initiative. So not to be missed. And some of the conference will be live streamed. And evidently there will also be recordings available after the conference of certain sections. It's quite expensive to get professional live streaming done. So there is a small fee, I understand, if you want to join the live stream during the actual conference day. I think that might be all we need. And if somebody could put the link to the slide deck and the speaker notes has a lot of good stuff, and that'll be available to you as a link from today's meeting.
I think I'm taking this quickly. I put in the chat links to the various meetings, but just to remind everybody that if you have time on Mondays at 1:30 or Thursdays at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, please join us for the various groups, whether that's the general meeting on Monday or the media and media outreach legislative meetings on Thursday. So look forward to seeing many of you folks on those meetings. I think that does it, Ron.
Yeah, thank you.
And Noel,
thank you, everybody.
I don't know. We got our picture, Karina, so I feel like I've done everything I need to do. So.
I'm here working on the post while we're all talking.
So, Kelowna, we'll give you your chance. If you have any questions for us, happy to try and take them. You can get probably 14 different answers, or 13. I'm not sure if counting right, but.
Yeah, no, this is great. I was just typing up my email in the chat, but beyond the green fee, I also represent other government agencies and CBOs in the public policy and public affairs space. I actually work with the Hawaii State Energy Office as well. So a lot of this renewable and clean energy initiatives are really great for my context. So I appreciate all the information. But no questions. I'll share. There we go. I'll share my email in the chat. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any follow-up questions related to the green fee. Reiterating again that we're starting to think about how does implementation and the green fee 2.0 look like for next session. So we'll keep this group and others appraised of how does that look like. But yeah, if there's any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out and happy to answer them.
Okay. Well,
Thank you.
Mahalo nui loa again for joining us and all the great information you shared. And I'm sure we'll follow up with a few other questions. I know you'll get one from Ron at least. So
yeah, we'll be on the lookout.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, hui ho and mahalo everyone for joining, and get back to watching these World Cup games. So anyway.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Take care.
everybody.
Thank you,
Have a good
Paul.
one.
Thank you. Aloha. Aloha.
Aloha.